Hi, welcome to this class. So in this class, we'll be talking about the case when function. Now, the case when function is an interesting function that helps to recategorize certain fields. It could be one or more fields. But I mean, let's just deep dive into it and then it becomes much more easier. So here we have this mid-year population data set from the Bigquery again, and this data set can be found in the Bigquery public data folder under the Census Bureau International folder as well. Now, when we query this data, like when we try to query this data, we see like this is the preview of the data. And then we could see that it has a country code, the country name, the year, and then the mid-year population. Now, if we wanted to maybe recategorize the year field, for instance, so assuming we wanted to bin the years into maybe pre 1980s, maybe 1990s, and post 1990s. So we would like to classify the year column into this. So we could basically come and we'll say select star. So basically it returns all the previous data set and then includes the case when. So we could say case when. So for, the first case we could say where year is less than 1980, then name this pre 1980 and as case when. So what have I done exactly here? So what I've done exactly here is to say select all, which basically brings this data set back, and then include one extra column, which is called case when, where wherever you find the year less than 1980, then you will call it pre 1980. That's exactly what this is saying. So case when year is less than 1980, then annotate it as pre 1980. Then you end the case when function. So when you run this query, for instance, what happens? So here you will see that it's basically working for cases where it's less than 1980. So it brings all the data set back exactly as we predicted. But then in the cases where is maybe 1980 and above, this is not working, right? So in this case, it's not working. Why? Because we didn't define it. So to write the case when completely, we need to define all the different use cases. So we could come here and say, so pre 1980, then this. So if we would like to define more cases, then we will put else. No, sorry, when. So we will put the next case that we would like to see. Then we will put it here. So when so first, because this case has been satisfied, the next one we will put here will now be like 1990. So this will be, so then you will call this pre 1990, or maybe 80, sorry. So we can call this one 80s. So here also we could maybe even put this in some kind of, like put it on a different line, because then it needs to be kind of readable. So to make it more readable, then we could put it in a different line, particularly like this. So maybe here it also comes like this, right? So, and then we have the pre-80s, then the 80s, and then we have to include the 90s. So when year is less than 2000, then 90s, right? Else post, so else post 90s. So what exactly have we done here? Now, the case when we're trying to build a case when that basically reclassifies this year. So it basically reclassifies this year column, and we're trying to bin different parts of the year into different naming. So first we say wherever it finds the year to be less than 1980, it could call it pre-1980. And then when it discovers that the year is less than 1990, then it could call it an 80. So now what has happened here is the query will first look for the ones that are less than 1980, and then it will name them. And then in between, then it's left with the whole 1980 dataset and above. And so it basically now basically looks for, out of this new set of data, then it looks for the ones that is less than 1990, and then it calls it in the 80s. And then it looks for the one that is less than 2000, and then it calls it in the 90s. So basically it's looking for the one between 1990 and 2000, and then it calls it the 90s. And every other one after, it's calling it the post 90s. So the idea is to have a couple of case when, which basically tells when is basically telling like the filter that is going to be placed, and then it's basically telling you what is the result going to be like. Now, when you're done with grouping all the cases and then you're left with the last case, what you would like to call the rest of the data set, then you can use the else function, which basically said for everything that is left now, you could call it the the post 90s, and then you wouldn't have to use a then function anymore, and then you just end and then you put it into a case when. So basically when you run this, and then what you see here now is basically the defined case when that we want. So for everyone that is less than 80s, you will see it. And when it is in the 80s, it will say it is in the 80s. And when it is in the 90s, right, it will say it is in the 90s. So you see like here, in these cases, you'll see like it's all in the 90s. And then when it is after the 90s, you will see that it's post 90s. And this is the idea of this, the idea of writing this type of query, a case when. Now, also you could apply, multiple case when functions, and like it doesn't necessarily have to be, stiff or a certain type of thing. I mean, we could take another option, especially with the population data sets. So, I mean, the population field itself. So, assuming we're supposed to, qualify a certain population as either low or, maybe high, or like maybe average, we want to bin them into a certain group. What we could basically do is we first do a quick analysis and say what is the max population. I mean, this gives us an idea of what is high, right? So max population, and then a minimum population, and then maybe an average population. So here what we're doing here basically is we are like taking the mid-year population, and basically we're trying to find the mean max, and so it gives us an idea of when it is high, when it is low, and when it is average. So when we run this query, now we could see that okay, so the first one is the case of the maximum, which is basically running into like this is basically running into like a billion, and the minimum is running into 2000, and then we have the case of the average running into some kind of millions. So now maybe we could, just make some quick assumptions. It's nothing really big. We could just say maybe, like we could say like they should select all, and then when the population is basically above, when it's less than 50,000, then we could say when mid-year population is less than 50,000, then we could call it low population, right? When it's less than 500,000, else, no, when, sorry, because then we still have another category. So Also here we need to bring it to the next line. So when mid-year population is less than one, so in this case we would like to know what is the median, right? So here we could find out that, like what is the average is like running into millions, right? So I mean the average should be around the middle, like, so basically we could say like when the median is maybe more than this, or maybe we could just say when it's more than 3 million. I mean, it's just an assumption as well. So then in this case, you will say average population. So for every other case that is not already defined, so every other case that is above 3,000, then will be seen as a high population. So when we run this query now, okay, then we have to end this to signify where it ends, and then we name column. So I could name it the case when population. So when we run this query now, what we get? So basically we get, a couple of low population, which is basically cases where it's less than 500,000. And so here you see like every case that is less than, over here is less than 500,000. When we go to the last page, we see cases that is, above 3 million, which is this. In this case, we're talking about 15 million, which basically says like this is a high population. So I mean, also if we were to maybe go to like one of the middle, we could maybe see the average population. So here we could see some kind of average population, which is basically here where the data is basically above 500,000, but it's below 3 million. So here it's like, average population. And this is the idea of case when. Now we will still visit case when again, because case when could also be derived by combining more than one field. But I think this course is already running like, a bit too long. So we'll see in the next one. Thank you.